And let me turn on the closed captioning for 1 second. Hold on 1 second, there it is, captions. Okay, we're ready to begin.
All right. So thank you. Welcome to all of you who were able to make it to the presentation tonight. I wanted to call your attention to the fact that we are also simultaneously providing this presentation in Spanish. So if you were wanting the Spanish version, please see the URL, the tiny URL below, and attend that meeting. I also wanted to introduce a few folks that will be helping with the presentation tonight. So Lena Bunson, the Assistant Superintendent of HR, will be presenting some information, as will Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Whitney Holton. I also want to thank my staff, Peg Tushak and Marla Sanchez, for helping put this together, and a special thank you to our translator, Veronica Gutierrez, and to Nairobi Aguilar, helping with the Spanish transmission tonight. And so with that, I wanted to just take a few minutes and acknowledge what a very challenging time this is and has been for our staff and for our families. And I know how stressful it is, because you really want to make the very best decision for your students. And I do appreciate that. And so I hope that information from tonight will help better inform you so that you can make that important decision. Next slide. So I wanted to be very clear on what we would be doing tonight. And so I will not be going through the detailed reopening plan that was sent out on Friday. This was really intended to give additional information for families based on the questions that they submitted. And so I wanted to be clear on that. So in some of the questions that we will respond to in our FAQs, but they will not be answered tonight. I also wanted to bring your attention to the graphic that you see on the right side of the slide, because that really indicates the type of learning and teaching model that we will be using depending on the health condition and the way the virus is behaving in our community. And so as you can see, when there is high risk for having schools open, we are in all distance learning. And then when the risk is reduced, we can move into a modified school opening. I also wanted to acknowledge that we will conclude this presentation at 7 o'clock tonight. Next slide, please. So again, even after tonight, if you feel that your questions were not answered, we're going to continue to have that form for submitting your questions available through August 5th. We will be transforming those questions into our FAQ, and that will be available on our COVID-19 page. Also, the recording of tonight's presentation will be posted on our district YouTube channel in both English and Spanish. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to acknowledge is I don't believe that it is by chance that this pandemic is called the novel coronavirus, because it is novel to us in so many ways. We are facing new challenges that we have not ever managed before. And that's true for you as parents, it's true for our staff, and it's certainly true for us as a district. And so a couple of things that I wanted to share with you in my effort to manage your expectations is that the level of specificity that you're hoping to get tonight may not be available. And one of the reasons for that is just that fact that based on the work year calendar, our teachers have a break between school years. And so their last day of work was June 14th, and they don't return until August 17th. And so as I'm going to share in the presentation, some of the specifics that get provided directly from the classroom teacher, from the grade level, from the school site. And so this is really intended to be a district overview, and we really are attempting to answer as many of your questions as we can. We also are seeking to honor our families' wishes in providing a distance learning model. And this is really similar to us opening a school a couple of weeks before the school year begins. So we are adjusting as rapidly as we can based on the changing guidelines. And I just want to remind us that when we finally got that much anticipated county public health guidelines about whether or not we could reopen school on June 30th, at that point, we were told that we could plan for, at least at the elementary sites, bringing all of our students back with all of the safety precautions. And as we're all aware, our conditions changed, and so we changed our plan with those conditions. Next slide. What I wanted to share with you here is the reason we asked for the questions to be submitted in advance was so we could prepare for responding to the concerns that were most prevalent within our community. And so you can see there what the topics that the questions coalesced around. And so we will begin our presentation with those that had the most inquiries, and then we will go through to the ones that had the least inquiry on this. I also wanted to draw your attention to why we're not having a Q&A process tonight, because we really want to respond to the entire community. And the Q&A might be someone asking a specific, very student-centric question that wouldn't pertain to the entire group, and that might not have met the community's needs as well. And again, we will be responding to the questions submitted in the FAQ. Next slide. So this is the graphic demonstrating the district's 4-phase plan for reopening for the school year. And I just want to call out a couple of things that I know are frustrating and maybe anxious, make people anxious. The fact that we don't have exact dates of when we will transition from one phase to the next. And I want to acknowledge that that's actually intentional, because we have no way of knowing when it will be safe enough for us to transition from one phase to the next. We also know that this is very dynamic. For any of you who have friends who are hairdressers, you know that there was much anticipation and excitement for them finally getting to open their salons, and many spent an entire week preparing for that, and it ended up being for a couple of days, and then they needed to go back to the prior closures. And so we're being very mindful of our need to be nimble and responsive, and we will continue to do that. I do want to draw your attention to this asterisk August 24th date. So the original student start date was August 20th. We are in discussions with our labor groups on being able to readjust our calendar to allow us to provide materials and equipment to our students so that they would be ready to begin learning the very first day of student learning. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Next slide. So a couple of things that I wanted to draw your attention to. So regardless of the phase we're in, these things will be true. And so we're seeking ways to provide for in-person or virtual orientation for our students with their teachers. The schools will provide schedules for those students needing devices, as well as ways to pick up the materials that they're going to need for learning. I also wanted to make sure that our community understood that the phase-in model is the district model, and so no action is required if you elect for your child to be in the district model. However, if you're wanting the all distance learning, you need to submit that information by August 3rd. I also wanted to call out that we've had a few requests from people wanting to go to the phase-in model who had previously said they wanted the all district learning model. And so we will be working with our enrollment department on a process to allow people to change prior to August 3rd. I also wanted to acknowledge that there will be assessments during each phase of our process, because even in distance learning, assessments can be proctored by the teacher. Also, I wanted to let you know that the students will, in middle school, will receive letter grades as they do when school is fully in session. And our elementary students will receive standards-based report cards. Next slide. So when we're looking at distance learning, as you can see here, and as the plan outlaid, there are much more specific requirements for what will happen during distance learning. And this was part of the budget trailer bill. And so as you can see, the goal is to provide as much in-person instruction as practicable. And as we've been saying, as safe to do so. We also will be providing devices to those students who need one. The content of instruction will still be based on essential standards, like it is in in-person instruction. We will continue to provide academic supports for specific target groups. Those who receive special education services will receive those services. We'll also provide our designated and integrated instruction for those who are developing their English language proficiency. There will also be daily live interaction with teachers and peers for the purposes of instruction. And there will also be progress monitoring. And you see some of the other requirements there for the minimum amount of minutes that are required, our requirement to continue to provide meals for those who receive free and reduced lunch or breakfast. We also will be monitoring and accountable for our weekly engagement with our students and how we're doing both synchronous, which is in-person live instruction, and asynchronous, which is not necessarily live instruction. Could be through a project that students are completing, or it could be through taped instruction that the student watches at another time. And we will be tracking the completion of all assignments. And again, there will be daily contact with the student or parents. Next slide. So the big question is, I believe, why do I have to choose distance learning for the entire year when I really don't know all of the dynamics at this time? So like I said at the beginning, we're essentially having to open a school for distance learning. And so that means first we have to understand how many students want to enroll in this program, and then we'll have to provide the staffing for it. And Lena Bunsen will go into a little bit more detail on that in a second. I also want to draw our attention that when we make a change, if we were to do it mid-year, it would have a district-wide impact on the enrollment across the district. We also want to provide consistency from the very beginning with our students and families, and so we wouldn't want to disrupt and change the students' teachers into the school year. So Lena, can you provide a little bit more detail on the process?
Absolutely. Good evening. The HR department works collaboratively with the enrollment department. We staff each of our 12 sites based on the number of students per grade level in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement with our teachers union. For grades TK through 3, we staff 24-1. For grades 4 through 8, we staff 30-1. With the distance learning only option, we will also staff based on our bargaining ratios that I just reviewed. What that means is students will be in class with other students from across the district. We may need to have combo classes with multiple grade levels if numbers do not support our ratios. We will design and assign Campbell Union School District teachers based on the number of students who enroll in distance learning. Therefore, teachers from across the district will teach in our distance learning model. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you. Next slide. So a couple of things that I wanted to call out about the full year distance learning program is if families elect for this program, they may return to their assigned school for the 20 that they were assigned to for this school year. They can return to that school the following year as long as that school has that grade level. Also, we outlined the program model. So the full distance learning program will be similar to that of the phased in model in the distance learning. However, some of the scheduling for the phased in is driven by the fact that our plan is to get to in-person instruction. And so the schedule and the structure of the distance learning for the phased in model is designed for consistency so that when students transition from phase 1 into phase 2, they will have had some of that same structure already. So again, as Lena mentioned, the teachers for distance learning will not necessarily be those from the student's current school. They'll be from within the district. And we do need the enrollment to be known by August 3rd so we understand how we need to staff this. And we also will then need to assign staffing to meet the need, which will mean pulling teachers from a site into the distance learning platform. Also, Wednesdays will be a minimum day for the all-year distance learning program to allow for the teacher's professional development and collaboration. Next slide. So now I would like for our Assistant Superintendent, Whitney Holton, to share with you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. And as you've heard, we have 2 different models, and we've had lots of questions about the differences and the similarities between the 2 models. So we wanted to provide you with some context so that it would help make your decision for your families. And I wanted to point out first, what are the same for each of the 2 models, both the phased in approach, and when the phased in approach is the model where everyone is starting in distance learning. Again, that is the one you do not have to select. You will automatically default to that program unless you choose the second program, which is the distance year-long program. And so the things that are the same, you've heard some of these things already this evening, but I'll just reiterate the ones that might need more explanation. We will follow the same curriculum. We will not be buying a specialized curriculum for the distance learning only program. Students will use our district adopted Common Core State Standards aligned curriculum. and they will follow the same hours of instruction, no matter what program they're in. You already heard about the teachers, and I think it's important to point out that there is going to be in both programs a blend of synchronous and asynchronous instruction for students, which means that students will be provided with a schedule in advance, and that schedule will be set so that the families know exactly what time students need to show up for their synchronous. And again, as a reminder, that is learning that occurs at the same time. So the teacher would log on to see the students, and so students would be provided with that schedule very clearly a week in advance, and that schedule would really stay the same from week to week. However, there may be some modifications based on student need, based on how the learning progresses of students, and sometimes teachers need to spend additional time with special populations for additional intervention or enrichment, just as they would in a traditional school day. It's also very important to point out that there will be a lot of self-directed learning in both models. This is where we are really going to practice our profile of a graduate competency of self-direction, and that is probably one of the silver linings of this whole pandemic, is that students are really starting to own their own learning, and we will continue to encourage that. And I think it's also very important that parents and families understand that neither one of these programs is designed to emulate a traditional school day. It is simply not healthy for kids to sit in front of a screen for the entire day as they would be in a classroom. We would never ask them to do that in the classroom. They would have time for student collaboration. They would have time to process their learning through talking and being with others. And so within both models, we strive to create those types of experiences for students so that they can be engaged with their peers and engaged with their teachers. So you'll see a healthy blend of hands-on learning activities versus screen time in both programs. There have been a lot of questions about when will I know my child's assigned teacher, and we will be publishing that just as we did in regular school setting the Friday before school starts, so parents can know who their child's teacher is. And the other thing that is the same in both programs would be the technology platforms that we're using. We utilize a blend of Zoom to do our instruction just like we're doing now. And then we also use, for the primary grades, a program called Seesaw. We use Google Classroom, and we use lots of other technology tools that support the learning process and help promote student engagement. And some of these things may be new to you, and we understand that newness. And so we will ensure that we are providing parent education as well, so that we can help parents be better prepared in both settings to support their students at home. You already heard us talk about the ratios. Those will be the same in both. And I also mentioned that the schedules will be provided weekly so that parents don't have any unanticipated surprises. Next slide, please. All right, we also wanted to point out what is different in the two models. And as Dr. Viramontez previously mentioned, the phased-in model is really being designed with the goal to return students as safely as possible, as soon as possible. And so we will follow all safety guidelines to make sure that we are able to, when we return students to a hybrid model. However, we just wanted to point out that the students in this phased-in model will be broken down into A-B cohorts, as they would be when they return for a hybrid approach. And the reason for us doing this is so that we can create a sense of culture among the students. And one of the things that we learned in the spring about distance learning is that whole group instruction is not necessarily the best strategy. We need to make sure that we have a healthy blend of whole group as well as small group instruction. And so this was designed to create a safe cohort where folks could be, or where students could be in a smaller group. And then when they return to the classroom, they will have a sense of already knowing those students. So it was intentional in planning in that regard. And some of the students may come back for in-person instruction in the distance learning phase, meaning we may have some small groups who need additional intervention, who need special education services, who need English language development. And so within the distance learning phase one, when we are all at home, there will be there may be some ability for students to come in small groups. So that's the phased in model. As opposed to the full distance learning model, some of the major differences are that students will be in grade level spans. So we'll have perhaps an entire first grade class. And as Lena mentioned, that might have to be a combination class depending on how many students enroll for this program. And one of the other things that is beneficial is that students will actually be comprised of the classes will be comprised of students from various schools. So the opportunity for people to meet new friends online. That is one of the actual downsides of the full year distance learning, is that students won't be able to be a part of the previously assigned at school activities, things that might be extracurricular. That is not going to be an option for full year distance learning students, due to the fact that when those are able to resume, of course, but due to the fact that we may not have space available or staffing. And in the full year distance learning program, it is important to note that increased parent responsibility is going to be necessary to have a tight collaboration between the teacher and parent. We obviously see parents as our partners in this program, and being that it will go on for the entire year, it is something that parents want to really consider when making the decision for what's best for their family. Next slide, please. All right, and here you see a phase 1 sample school schedule for the elementary program, with the start time of 8:30, ending at 12:15 for grades TK and K. I want to point out that we are making sure that we are embedding all of the mandatory requirements that Dr. Viramontez mentioned in SB 98. And we want to, so we do have the required amount of time. The TK and K mandated requirements are less than Campbell Union School District normally provides, since we have a full day kindergarten program. We will have optional activities for students in TK and K beyond 12:15, but we also encourage families to build up to that, because we want to really, again, promote a healthy balance of screen time and hands-on learning time. So you'll see that the calendar the times for the other grades are 8:30 to 2:15, and they will have a pretty strict schedule during that time frame. Now, there's a blend of asynchronous and synchronous. Students can do the asynchronous work at times other than what is designated. However, we do encourage families to create a solid schedule for their child and stick to it, so that it is really valuing the educational process, and so that when students come back to school for our hybrid model, it will be less shock to their systems when they can come back and be a part of classroom instruction. So you'll see there the content is listed, the days of the week, the times, and I do want to point out that a child schedule, this is a sample for all kids in a class. A child might not be called at all of these times. They would perhaps, from 9:15 to 9:45, doing literacy with the teacher 2 days a week, and on their own 2 days a week with materials that the teacher pushes out to them. So all of the work in both programs are pushed out through the teacher. So you see here the sample schedule that does accommodate all of our content areas and allows for both synchronous, asynchronous, large group, and whole group. And then now we move on to the year-long program for our elementary program. The same hours you see, and pretty much the same schedule of mix of whole class and group instruction. And again, I will just reiterate that not all of this instruction would be live with the teacher. Some of it would be pushed out, and students would be called to their very specific Zoom times based on the schedule provided to them by their teacher. And that describes the schedules for the elementary programs. Next slide.
So you've seen this slide both by information from the Public Health Department and also in our own plan. And I wanted to point out why there would be variation between our elementary reopening phases and our middle school reopening phases. And that's just to remind us of the research around young child exposure compared to that of older children, in that older children respond more similar to adults than younger children. And so keeping the social distancing and all of those necessary elements becomes more important than perhaps in the early elementary grades, although we're going to be very cautious with all of our students, regardless of grade level. Next slide. So the things that are different in the phase-in approach versus the year-long approach for the distance learning is that in the phased-in model, because the goal is to set it up so that when we're able to return to in-person instruction, it is as similar to the middle school schedule as possible. And so students will be assigned 6 different classes, which would include electives and PE. Students will have access to clubs, culture building events, and activities as those are allowed according to our health orders. And students would also remain in classes with students from their school and their grade level, and they will be taught by teachers from their school site. How that differs for middle school students in the full year distance learning is that students will likely not have 6 different content teachers unless the enrollment was large enough to warrant that. The classes will be made up of students from both of our middle schools. And because students will essentially be enrolled in a different school for this year, they would not be participating in events or activities of the other middle schools. And also, as Whitney mentioned earlier, because of the duration of this time, the increased parent responsibility and collaboration with the teacher will be essential. Next slide. So these are sample schedules, and I wanted to draw attention to the fact that this is the hybrid model for in-person learning. And one of the things that you'll see here is the homeroom approach to allow for a smaller group of students to be monitored by each staff member or each teacher on the campus to create community and to be able to support students effectively. So rather than each of the teachers being responsible for up to 150 students, the homeroom teacher would serve as a point person for students and families, although students would still be interacting with each of their teachers. You'll also see that there is a block schedule proposed here, with Wednesdays being predominantly asynchronistic learning, except for the daily outreach that would happen with their homeroom teacher. Next slide. So this is just simply to demonstrate that there could be a block schedule in the all distance learning middle school schedule, or there could be 6 periods a day. This largely is dependent on the enrollment, which then would determine how many staff members that we're able to hire. Also, it may model itself more like a K-8 school might, in that you would have a multiple subject teacher teaching several subjects to the student rather than each subject specific teacher teaching the subjects. Next slide. So, a couple of things that I want to remind us of. We will only transition into the hybrid in-person learning when it is safe to do so, and that means in accordance with our county public health guidelines and the governor's guidelines. We will give at least 2 weeks advance notice to families prior to transitioning into the next phase. And the reason we're not giving a longer window is, again, because we want as much in-person instruction as we're able to offer. A couple of things that will be true about the middle school schedule will be that arrival and dismissal times will vary based on grade level, and we'll also use different entrance and exits to reduce the number of folks entering any one area. And we will take daily attendance whether the student is attending in person or they're attending virtually. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the safety and facility preparation because there was a lot of detailed information in the plan that we sent out, and you can see there the pages referenced for you. I just want to do a couple of high-level things to let the community know that each school will have a designated quarantine space for those students who are demonstrating symptoms that are consistent with COVID-19, and those students would be safely quarantined and supervised without being in direct contact with others until they could be removed from the campus. We have ensured that each of our schools have the necessary disinfectant and PPE for staff. We also have our facilities prepared with signage when we're able to return. We have checked all of our ventilation systems, and those classrooms which do not have their own air conditioning or ventilation unit will not be used whenever possible. And we're also preparing outdoor areas for learning and activities because we know that that is one of the recommendations, being outside as much as possible. So we've gotten some shade coverings and things like that to allow for that. Also, we will designate recess cohorts, and those cohorts will have designated locations on the playground. Those areas will change to allow variety for the students, but they will be scheduled to prevent the cohorts from interacting with one another. And again, all of our protocols are aligned with the public health departments for when staff or students become exposed or infected, and that is outlined in our plan. Next slide. So this is our special education services, and Lena is going to share with us. And Lena, I just want to remind us that this is being translated simultaneously, so please speak slow enough for that to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you. The special ed department has been preparing for distance learning to meet the needs of our students with IEPs. We've had a special ed subcommittee that's already met 3 times that include our specialists, RSP teachers, SDC, school psychologists, speech pathologists, behaviorists, and instructional assistants, who have all provided input to determine considerations needed to support our students with IEPs. We have more planning to do and plan to meet next week. Students who have IEPs are assigned to a case manager who oversees their IEP to ensure all supports and services are met. Case managers will be reaching out to parents to collaborate and describe the individual services in their child's IEP. This will be done by what's called a prior written notice, or a PWN, that describes the changes that their child will receive to support distance learning. We have looked at the considerations needed, and we know the importance of the daily live instruction, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the unique needs of the children with the different disabilities, so we will plan accordingly. We want to ensure students receive appropriate accommodations and modifications that they need in their general ed environment. We want to do regular communication with families to determine if there are any changes needed to the students' services. We want to develop lessons to incorporate social emotional learning. And we know the importance of contacting our parents regarding services and schedules as they may adjust depending on the unique needs of our students. We know it's important to consider the goals and the students' need to support the instruction. That's why the different disciplines have worked in breakout sessions to look at placement in SDC. The teachers will teach learning readiness and they will embed that into the daily schedule. They will also model the student schedule just as the general ed schedule is. For RSP, the case managers will work in collaboration with the general education teachers to design schedules to push in or push out based on the student's needs. And our related service providers, who are our speech pathologists, adaptive PE, school psychologists, they will collaborate with the case managers and the teachers and the parents to ensure that their goals and their services are met, which will be included in the PWN. Shelley?
Next slide. And Ms. Bunsen, that is also you.
Great. Mental health. We understand that students may be impacted in multiple ways because of COVID-19 and the closure of schools. Therefore, it's critical that we are mindful of our students' emotional well-being, and that's why Campbell is prepared to support our students' social and emotional health. We are training staff to incorporate daily social emotional learning for our students. We know how important connections are, and we will be emphasizing connections with both our students and our staff. We'll provide professional development and resources to our staff to support them and their students. This is a tremendous opportunity for adults to model for children how to problem solve, flexibility, and compassion. We have developed a mental health diagnostic team to work in partnership with our outside agencies, our district office, and our sites to support student needs throughout the district. The team has school psychologists, counselors, behaviorists, therapists, and we're hiring a social worker to support the student study teams at the point of struggle. We are very proud of our multiple community-based partnerships who will also provide additional supports, including trainings to staff, students, and parents. Thank you.
Next slide. So there were a number of questions about school-specific programs. So students enrolled in schools with specific programs, such as our dual immersion program, will continue that instruction commitment during each of the 4 phases in the model. So for instance, Sherman Oaks will provide their instruction in Spanish even during the distance learning platform, consistent with their model of in kindergarten, 90% of the instruction is done in Spanish, 80% in first grade, and so on. One thing I did want to call out that consistent with the guidelines, we are limiting the number of non-staff adults on any of our campuses. And so Village will be working to restructure their parent participation activities that have become an integrated part of their program. And CSI will continue with their design thinking emphasis. And we will have preschools operating at 6 locations. We actually currently have them operating. So the distinction I want to make here is for students enrolled in distance learning for the year, we won't be able to provide students from these specific schools that school-centric focus. Next slide. One of the things I wanted to bring the community's attention to is the fact that within the governor's plan, indicating that if schools or districts reside in a county that has not been off of the monitor list for at least 14 consecutive days, that they must remain in distance learning. However, within that, there was a waiver allowance for elementary schools to reopen for some in-person instruction, even during the distance learning phase. So we are examining the possibility of doing that. And if we apply for the waiver, it has to be approved first by our local public health department, and then they would send it on for state approval. And in order to do this, we will be doing this in collaboration with our district labor groups, as is required in the waiver. Also, I wanted to just briefly mention this learning continuity and attendance plan. And that is something that was developed and was part of the trailer bill language in the budget for this school year. And so there were some specific funds provided for us to, what the legislators called address the learning loss, or for learning loss mitigation. And so I'm going to ask Whitney to just share a little bit about that process. And I ask for the community's patience on this because the actual document that we have to fill out has not yet been finalized. And so there's a lot of murk around this, but we're working through it. So Whitney, can you add to that?
Sure. So the learning continuity and attendance plan is basically asking us to determine how we will spend funds to ensure that there is continuity of learning, that students who need special services are receiving them, that we are providing meals for families who may be on free or reduced lunch, that we are also addressing the students' and families' mental health. And so this plan asks us to outline all of those things. And a big part of the plan is stakeholder feedback. And that's where we will bring ideas to our stakeholders. That's our community, our students, our parents, and our teachers, and our classified staff as well, to determine how we should spend these funds. And unfortunately, it's not a free-for-all. There are some limitations to the funding that will be shared in those stakeholder meetings. And one of the big difficulties with this funding is that most of it has to be spent by December 30th. And we know that our needs are going to continue well beyond December. So I will be bringing the proposed budget to various stakeholder groups and getting feedback from our community and adding that into a final plan, which goes to our school board to be approved at the end of September.
Next slide. So we know that this is a big need for much of our community, and we acknowledge that. And we've looked into what we might be able to offer to the community. And at this point, the only thing that we're able to provide is our after school care, which is from 2:30 to 6, 5 days a week. We know that may not support those of you who also need some help during the school day, but because we don't know how many classrooms our teachers will need, because many of them actually will provide their distance learning instruction from their classroom, we first need to account for that need. And also, we are not sure that we can continue to provide during the school day care and after school care because of the restrictions on blending cohorts. One of the things that we have done is we've reached out to our community organizations and also the city of Campbell to see if we could do any partnerships to support this need, and we will continue our communication efforts to address that. And as I said earlier, we're still waiting for direction from the County Public Health Department on whether or not we would be able to have students be in more than one cohort. So one cohort for their classroom instruction and another cohort for after school support, since not every student in our classrooms also stays for after school care. Also, we have provided school day childcare information that's being offered throughout the county in that link. Next slide. So as you heard, part of the requirement is for us to continue to provide meals regardless of the setting that we're in. And so during distance learning, there will be a schedule for meal pickup, and that will be provided to all of our families who are eligible for that. We also will continue, as we have done since March 16th, we've been providing meals at most of our schools during the summer, and so we will continue to maintain our physical distancing. And this is when we're in school session. So from the distance learning, now we're in hybrid. So when students go for lunch in the hybrid model, we'll stagger or modify the break and lunch times to reduce the number of students that are in one area at the same time. And as much as we are able to, lunch and snack breaks will be held outside. And yes, students will be able to bring their own meals and snacks from home. We will promote hand hygiene, hand washing before and after breakfast and lunch breaks. And then we will follow our same process for how students' meals are charged. And just a reminder, each year families need to reapply for free and reduced lunch status. Next slide. So there were some questions about transportation, and because of the distancing requirements, we are not able to transport as many students as we historically have been able to on our buses. And so at this point, we are only planning for those that we are legally required to transport. And part of the screening for symptoms must be done prior to the child entering the bus. And so parents will have to wait at the bus stop until the child has been admitted onto the bus, because any student exhibiting symptoms will not be allowed onto the bus. We'll also have seating charts to maintain stability, having cohort students sit together or siblings sit together as much as possible. And the seating charts will be done in a way to limit students passing one another in the aisle. And next slide. So to stay informed, as we all have experienced, the information changes quickly and rapidly. And so we will continue to keep you informed as much as we can. Schools will be letting you know how to get the Chromebook and the materials, what specific things will be provided for our TK and K, as well as our new entering sixth graders at our middle schools, what teacher your child will be assigned to, and all of those many things that the school historically provides to our families. I once again want to remind you that our teachers do not return until August 17th. And our principals did not come back until this last Monday. And so the information will be coming out as quickly as they're able to get it out to you. And I also wanted to let you know that we already did receive a request. How do I undo my distance learning registration if I now want my child to stay in distance learning. So I will be working with our enrollment department to determine a process for how families prior to August 3rd can undo their original request to be in year-long distance learning. Next slide. So again, the information from the questions that have been submitted and the ones that can be submitted until August 5th will be converted into frequently asked questions on our COVID-19 website, well, our webpage with our COVID-19 webpage. Also, if you have not yet subscribed to our weekly e-newsletters, that is the best way to stay current with information. We have a district newsletter, as well as each site has their own newsletter that you can subscribe to. You can also please check your email for any messages from the school or the district. We also provide updated information on our Facebook page, on Twitter, on Instagram, and our YouTube channel at Campbell USD. And speaking of Twitter, I understand that there was a glitch in tonight's presentation, and there were some people who were not able to get into this presentation. So thankfully, it has been tweeted out that it has been recorded, and they will be able to get it on our YouTube page. And also, just a reminder, for those of you who may have burning questions still, you can submit those on the COVID-19 page. And I would also encourage you, if you have student-specific questions or site-specific questions, those should be targeted to your school site principal. And then once the teachers return, if you have specific classroom questions, those should go to the classroom teacher. And I just wanted to offer one last comment about the schedules. So I want you to think similarly to the way the district designs the schedules for during traditional time. We designate the start time and the end time, and we designate the curriculum that will be taught, and we designate the essential standards that will be focused on. And our teachers then within that, they have the flexibility to determine what content is appropriate for whole group instruction, what content is appropriate for small group instruction, what is appropriate for project-based learning, how to integrate multiple content areas into one activity. So that flexibility will still be part of what you will see in distance learning. So the schedules will not always be identical for all students, because our teachers and grade levels need the ability to reteach as necessary and to provide adaptability based on the needs of their students. So I just wanted to have you keep that in mind. I also thank you again for your attention to this, and I hope that it provided information that you were seeking. And I continue to wish you all well as we navigate through this. Thank you and have a good night.